That's it. She's grounded. Well, maybe it's good this pastor wants to talk about it. I sure as hell don't.
I'm going to ask everyone to please mute themselves. We'll get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm Gabriel Meyer, the Executive Director of the Ruskin Art Club of Los Angeles. This is our second installment of Availing Toward Life, a three-part series of interactive study sessions in which we not only make Professor Spates work, but we also work ourselves. Of interactive sessions on Ruskin's masterpiece on the first principles of political economy unto this last. If you missed last week's session, worry not. It will soon be posted on our YouTube channel at www.ruskinartclub.org. Tonight, we are going to be very ambitious indeed. We are going to try to highlight the themes of two of the four essays of Unto This Last, the middle essays, The Veins of Wealth and Qui Judicatis Terram, Latin for You Who Judge the Earth. We'll see how far we get. We may run, I think it's safe to say, a little longer than usual. As we did last week, Jim will highlight the themes of each essay by taking us through a group of selected paragraphs from the essay, one by one, which we will follow with discussion. Again, however, because of the amount of material that we plan to cover tonight, we'll pause for open discussion, not after each paragraph as we did last week, but after Jim has finished guiding us through each essay as a whole. And then we'll have a chance to comment and reflect together. Obviously, a paragraph here or there can only hope to give us a taste of the richness of these essays. But if you'll go on our website in the calendar listing, you'll find a PDF of the whole book, of the complete Unto This Last, with Clive Wilmer's marvelous notes and commentary. You'll also find a PDF of each of the individual essays that we're covering and a link to the selected paragraphs for each session. As I pointed out last week, a little preliminary reading will go a long way towards making these sessions and our discussions richer and more fruitful. So I'll alert you tonight when we're going to pause for discussion, and then you can unmute yourself as you wish to speak. Jim Spates is an old friend who hardly needs introduction here, but I'll do it anyway. Is Professor Emeritus of Sociology at Hobart and William Smith Colleges in Geneva, New York. He is the co-founder with Sarah Atwood in 2020 of the Ruskin Society of North America, webmaster of the blog site Why Ruskin, a companion of Ruskin's Guild of St. George, a member of the Roycroft campus community, and last but not least, a member of the Ruskin Art Club of Los Angeles. For the last 3 decades, he has lectured regularly in both the UK and the US on various aspects of Ruskin's life and work. Jim, take it away.
Well, thank you, Gabriel. It's a wonderful thing to see so many faces from last week back again, and to see some new faces, people I haven't seen since all this COVID stuff came down on us not so long ago. We're going to do something extremely ambitious tonight. We'll see how it goes. As Gabe said, we're going to try to deal with 2 of Ruskin's essays in Unto This Last. There were a total of 4. There were meant to be 7. We'll talk more about that next week as we have our 3rd session as well. But what I plan to do is to share with you a few paragraphs from each of the essays. And then at the end of that sharing, let's have some discussion, question, Q&A as best we can in the time that we have available to us. If you have a question, you can either put it in the chat and Gabriel will read it, or you can take notes and ask it when we get to the Q&A session. These essays of Ruskin's are they're like Hamlet. They are so amazingly complex and so dense and so detailed. I have read them now probably 15 or 20 times in my life, and every time I go through them, as for this evening, or go through some of them as for this evening, I find them to be richer than I thought the time before, which I think is almost impossible. So in any event, I thought what I would do to begin would be to give you just a 2 or 3 minute reminder of where we were last week. We read and discussed the first essay, the roots of honor. And you'll recall that, and I urge you all, if you have the time, to go back and reread the whole essay again, because it frames everything that comes after that for the 4 essays. Ruskin begins his first essay, as you'll recall, in his first paragraph with a direct attack on the economic thought of his time. He says there's a great, not to say colossal, mistake that was made by the political economists, the theorists of society and economics of his time, was their assumption that human beings were, as he called them, covetous machines. Covetous machines whose sole task in life was to get as much money or material goods for themselves as they possibly could, with no concern for the cumulative effort and how that affected others. It was at best, and I underline at best, an amoral effort. The political economists, he means people here, Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, folks of that nature. Political economists did not take into account the eternal role of what he calls the affections in everyday life. We could also call them the emotions or feelings, but Ruskin uses the word affections very advisedly in trade. We say glibly, cavalierly, without thinking much about it, that as we do business with one another, it's not personal. We say as we're destroying somebody else, we're weakening them in some particular way or taking advantage of them. So it's not personal, it's just business. To Ruskin, all business is personal. All trade either makes the people involved in trade stronger or weaker, stronger in the things that make them able to deal with life better, or weaker so that they are less able to deal with things in life. You'll remember the parable which I used at the very beginning of our talk last time. This is the parable of the vineyard owner and the workers who went to work for him in his vineyard. And Christ was a very famous preacher of the time, and many of the people who came to hear him preach as he went on his itinerant way would ask him, would you tell us, you say you came from the kingdom of heaven, tell us what that's like. And he said, well, I can't really quite tell you what it's like, but I can give you an idea of what it's like. And the way in which I will do that is I'm going to tell you this story, the story of the vineyard owner and his workers. And the short image of that is that on a given day in the fall, when the grapes were ripe, a vineyard owner went to the market and hired some men to go to work for him in his vineyard. He went out later in the day, found more men that were available to work in the vineyard, so he hired them. And he paid them all a penny a day. And he paid them a penny a day because a penny a day is what they needed in order to live decently in their own lives and come back to work the following day and work again if they needed to. He would hire them again. He paid them a penny a day because it was sufficient unto their needs. He paid them a penny a day because they were human beings. He didn't try to pay them less than a penny a day. He gave them the penny a day that they needed. In trade, money is made. Money has to be exchanged and money has to be made and sometimes lost. And as Ruskin always argued, what we do with the money that he argues in the essays that we're going to talk about tonight, that the whole purpose of money is to be used in some way to make life stronger. And in the course of the essay, as he gets to the end of the essay, he talks about all these great professions that we have, soldiers and physicians and lawyers and tradespeople. And he outlines what their true function is in life. And one of the great contributions of the Roots of Honor is to give us a definition of what the merchant's function is in life. And he says the merchant's function is to provide for the nation, that anybody who is involved in business and production should be only involved in the things that make life better, make it easier for us to live well, etc. And anything less than that, we should not be involved in. The vineyard owner did this. It was as though The vineyard owner sat down before that morning when he went out to the market to hire these men and said, what do I need to get done? The answer was, I need to get somebody to work in the vineyard and come and pick the grapes and get them so that we can process them to make the wine for the coming year. And then he asked himself a second question. This is the question that Ruskin said is the essential question that's left out of so much of trade. He said, what do the people who come to work for me need? And he thought about it and he said, well, it's very clear that they need at least a penny a day in order to thrive and do well in their own lives. So that's what I'll pay them. And he agreed with them all to give them a penny a day. And he did that because they were human beings, because he had affection for them, because he cared for them as human beings. And that's what's different about Ruskin's model as opposed to most of the models that you read about in the other political economic treatises of Ruskin's time. His arguments in this essay and the ones we're going to discuss tonight were met with a sort of barrage of negative criticism from many of his readers. They said, who are you? You are an art critic. You're not allowed, or you should not be allowed to tell us how to conduct our business. And they put pressure on his publisher saying, who are you to hire this fellow Ruskin who doesn't know what he's talking about to talk about business? And so the negative reactions to Ruskin's theses in all of Unto This Last began to mount as the essays appeared in the Cornhill magazine over time. We're going to share with you a few paragraphs now from the first essay we're going to talk about tonight, The Veins of Wealth. And hopefully the paragraphs will, we'll come back to these images you're seeing very quickly. We'll come back to them a little bit later on. And these are paragraphs from the roots at the very beginning of the second essay, The Veins of Wealth. And he's reacting in some way to the criticism that he's received. Ruskin writes, it is indeed true that certain advantages of a general nature may be obtained by the development of social affections, but political economists never profess, nor profess to take advantages of a general nature into consideration. Our science is simply the science of getting rich. So far from being a fallacious or visionary one, it is found by experience to be practically effective. Persons who follow its precepts do actually become rich, and persons who disobey them become poor. Every capitalist of Europe has acquired his fortune by following the known laws of our science and increases his capital daily by adherence to them. It is vain to bring forward tricks of logic against the force of accomplished facts. Every man of business knows by experience how money is made and how it is lost. Pardon me, Ruskin goes on, men of business do indeed know how they themselves made their money or how on occasion they lost it. Playing a long practice game, they are familiar with the chances of the cards and can rightly explain their losses and gains. But they neither know who keeps the bank of the gambling house, nor what other games might be played with the same cards, nor what other losses or gains far away among the dark streets are essentially, though invisibly, dependent on theirs in the lighted rooms. This is an illusion, which you'll come back later to as the essay progresses, that the decisions that are made by those who have a great deal of money and are very powerful which essentially throw other people into poverty and disadvantage. In other words, these people have learned a few, but only a few of the laws of mercantile economy, how to make money, but not those of political economy. So that's the first paragraph. Gabriel, can we go to the second paragraph? I'm going to read you 2 or 3 of these and then we'll have a discussion. Immediately after what I just read you, Ruskin writes, primarily what is very notable and curious, this is one of the most innovative things he says in this essay. I observe that men of business rarely know the meaning of the word rich. At least if they know, they do not in their reasonings allow for the fact that it is a relative word, implying its opposite poor as positively as the word north implies its opposite south. Men nearly always speak and write as if riches were absolute and it were possible by following certain scientific precepts for everybody to be rich. Whereas riches are a power like that of electricity, acting only through inequalities or negations of itself. The force of the guinea in your pocket depends wholly on the default of a guinea in your neighbor's pocket. If he did not want it, it would be of no use to you. The degree of power it possesses depends accurately upon the need or desire he has for it. And the art of making yourself rich, this is the best part of this paragraph, and the art of making yourself rich in the ordinary mercantile economist sense is therefore equally and necessarily the art of keeping your neighbor poor. Money is all. That's a wonderful little paragraph there. And it infuriated the business people of his day. They said, we don't set out to make people poor. We just know how to make money. They don't know how to make money. And so we make the money and then they don't make the money. Just to give you a sense of this, in case you are not terribly familiar with it, I went to the web today and I found these following things in terms of income, the amount of money that people make in their employment in a given year. 25 million American households. A household is defined as a family of 4. 25 million American households have incomes of $25,000 or less a year. In comparison, 7.5 million households make over 200,000 a year, which is three times as much, 200,000 a year. So that's an enormous difference. That's income. Wealth is even more worrisome. If you look at the figures for wealth, wealth would be defined as the amount of money you have available, the value of your possessions, your art, your books, your houses, your cars, all of those things together. In terms of wealth, the top 10% or the richest 10% of the American public controls 70% of all the wealth in the United States. 10% controls 70% of all the wealth. And the bottom 2% controls less than 2% of all the wealth. Right. So Ruskin's whole notion about riches being a force like electricity, positive implies negative, negative implies positive, is what we would call today a zero-sum theory. Let's say there are $10,000 available in the circulating in the market at the time. It could be 10 million, could be 10 trillion, which is much closer to the point in terms of the American economy. It is, if there's 10, let's leave it at 10,000 for the moment. If there's 10,000 out there and I have 9,000 of it, I can do what I want with the 9,000 of it, and you and everybody else that who is out there has to make do with the 1,000 that is left. In other words, I become slowly rich, you become clearly poor, because it is a zero-sum thing. The more I have, by definition, the less you have. And so this whole idea that money is the raison d'etre of business is the idea that we go out and try to keep our neighbor poor. We try to get more money for ourselves and take more money away from them. And Ruskin's argument is that we literally then create and acquiesce in the creation of the poverty that surrounds us in the country as a whole. Which is, you see the parallel here to the first essay, that the merchant's function is to provide for the nation. He says in a passage that I read to you at the end of the hour last time, that the job is to provide for the nation, not to make money. Money has to be made, money has to be exchanged, but money is not the purpose of doing business. Money, you have to make enough money to keep your business alive. You have to make enough money to keep your family healthy as well. But money is not the purpose of doing business. What is the purpose of doing business is to provide for the nation the things that it needs to survive well. All right, well, this brings us to a third paragraph, which is Ruskin's definition of political economy. This definition is, well, let's see, it's probably, let's say 1860, so it's 160 years old. I have never found a better. If anybody out there knows of a better or finds a better, please do let me know, because I would certainly love to read it and debate it with you all. Here's his definition of political economy, and I would like you to pay very close attention to the argument that he's making here. Political economy, the economy of a state or of citizens, consists simply in the production, preservation, and distribution at the fittest time and place of useful or pleasurable things. Now look at his examples and remember the title of this essay, The Veins of Wealth. The farmer who cuts his hay at the right time, or gets his grapes in the vineyard at the right time. the shipwright who drives his boats well home in sound wood, the builder who lays good bricks in well-tempered mortar, the housewife who takes care of her furniture in the parlor and guards against all waste in her kitchen, and the singer who rightly disciplines and never overstrains her voice are all political economists in the true and final sense, adding continually to the riches and well-being of the nation to which they belong. Notice that all of these examples are examples of living things that you do that create a better life for the people for whom you create them. So the singer who guards against overstraining her voice so she can sing better for you tomorrow is a political economist in the sense that Ruskin means it. In contrast to political economy is what he calls mercantile economy. Mercantile economy is the economy of mercies or of pay, and it signifies the accumulation in the hands of individuals of legal or moral claim upon or power over the labor of others. Every such claim implying precisely as much poverty and debt on one side as it implies riches on the other. So that again, the whole image that we had a moment ago, the more I have by definition, the less you have. So now I would like to insert a little bit that we left out of the paragraphs that we put up on the website. Another little small passage from the Veins of Wealth a little bit further on from where we were. Ruskin writes, what is really desired under the name of riches, and we should all think about this, what is really desired under the name of riches is essentially power over men. In its simplest sense, the power of obtaining for our own advantage the labor of servant, tradesman, or artist. In a wider sense, the authority of directing large masses of the nation to various ends, good, trivial, or hurtful according to the mind of the rich person. And this power of wealth, of course, is greater or less in direct proportion to the poverty of men over whom it is exercised, and in inverse proportion to the number of persons who are as rich as ourselves and who are ready to give the same price for an article of which the supply is limited. If the musician is poor, he will sing for small pay, as long as there is only one person who can pay him. But if there be two or three, he will sing for the one who pays him the most. And thus the power of riches of the patron, always imperfect and doubtful, as we shall see presently, even when most authority depends first on the poverty of the artist and then on the limitation of the equally wealthy persons who also want seats at the concert. So that, as earlier stated, the art of becoming rich in the common sense is not absolutely nor finally the art of accumulating much money for ourselves, but also of contriving that our neighbors shall have less. In accurate terms, then, let me tell it as clearly as I can. It is the art of establishing the maximum inequality of money in our favor. And that one I left out, for which I apologize, but that is an important part of this essay as we go forward. Gabriel, let's see if we can find the next paragraph here. So he then goes on to say that this whole issue of making money and who has how much and so on is a very complex affair. It is quite possible for any person involved in trade, and here we think of the vineyard owner. It is quite possible for anybody involved in trade to take into account the well-being of the person or persons he or she hires to do the work for him, saying to himself, what does this person need in order to live a decent life? What does this person need in order to be strong enough to come back to work tomorrow and work for me again? And that's the amount of money I should pay him. So in the case of the vineyard owner, it was a penny a day. Now it would be something else. We may not know exactly what that figure is, but if we put our minds to it, we can figure it out. He now in the essay proceeds to give examples of some, this is a wonderful example, two examples that he gives of people cast away on a desert island. And there's only two of them, and they have to figure out a way to survive. And the way that they survive, and you'll find this wonderful reading when you go back and reread the essay. The way in which they survive is that they decide they can only do well if they support one another. One produces X, the other produces Y. Then they share X and Y as each needs X and Y. And as they do so, each remains stronger. And as long as they continue to support each other, they will continue to be strong as they possibly can in the things that lead to their own betterment in life. And then after he's talked about this for quite some time, he gives us a third example or second example. He says, now assume there's a third person involved. And here's another passage. I think that we've also left this one out here. He says, suppose that 3 men instead of 2 form the little isolated island republic I've imagined. And they find themselves obliged to separate in order to farm different pieces of land at some distance from one another along the coast. Each estate furnishes a distinct kind of produce, and each more or less is in need of the material raised by the other. Now suppose that the third man, in order to save the time of all 3, undertakes simply to superintend the transference of commodities from one farm to another, on condition of receiving some sufficiently remunerative share of every parcel of goods conveyed, or of some other parcel received in exchange for it. If this carrier, or this is the third person, this is now the introduction of a very important role in trade, the introduction of the middleman. If this carrier or messenger always brings to each estate from the other estates what is chiefly wanted at the right time, the operations of the 2 farmers will go on prosperously, and the largest possible result in produce or actual wealth will be attained by the little community. But suppose no intercourse between the landowners is possible except through this traveling agent, and that after a time, this agent, watching the course of the other men's agriculture, decides to keep back the articles with which he has been entrusted until there comes a period of extreme necessity for them on one side or the other, and then he extracts in exchange for them all that the distressed farmers can spare in other kinds of produce. This introduces a whole new element, and a very complex element. It introduces the idea of trickery, of chicanery, of some way of creating a secret and not giving somebody enough what they really need to survive. And that happens in business all the time, and Ruskin's certainly aware of it. He decides to keep back the articles which he's been entrusted in until there comes a period of extreme necessity for them on one side or another, and then extracts in exchange for them all that the distressed farmers can spare of other kinds of produce. It is easy to see that by ingeniously watching his opportunities, he might possess himself regularly of the greater part of the superfluous produce of the other estates, and at last, in some year of severest trial or scarcity, purchase both for himself and maintain the former proprietors, therefore, as his laborers or servants. In other words, he controls now virtually all the wealth of the 3 estates, and now can do with it and force the others to do what he wants. In other words, to put it in terms of the metaphor that we began with here, rather than paying them a penny a day, he decides to pay them, let's say, 70% of a penny a day. And he does that every day. And if he pays them 70% of a penny a day for a week, they are short a penny and a half by the end of the day. And Ruskin's argument would be that they are weakened. They are literally weakened by that penny and a half a day that they haven't had. They can't get as good food. They can't buy as good clothes for their children. They can't pay their rent on time. And so they slowly fall under the power of the person who has kept back the payment for them. If they do it for a whole year, then a tremendous amount of what was needed to maintain that family, that person and that family has been withheld, and they are weaker. And so the point Ruskin wants to make is that this every time, here's a wonderful line of Ruskin's, I'm not quite sure where it comes out for the first time. Every time there's a secret, every time there's trickery, watch out. Every time there's trickery, all dealings should be open and honest. Everybody should know what everybody's making. And if they know what everybody's making, they can decide whether they're going to be part and parcel of that or not. This is a fundamental, in other words, all trade is fundamentally, is a moral consideration. When I interact with you and try to do trade with you, it is my obligation as an honest and decent human being to be straight up with you with what I'm giving you, the kind of work I'm doing for you, what you will get for it and what I will get for it. And if I do that, that's an honest trade. But if I don't, if I hide something from you so that you don't know what I'm going to do, or I cut corners, or in some ways do some kind of nefarious trade behind your back that you don't know about. I am literally stealing from you the things that you need to stay alive and stay well. And Ruskin is, of course, trying to deal with all of this, trying to get us to think about all this chicanery and why we shouldn't have it. We can choose. We're human beings. We can choose. We have agency. We can make selfish choices, or we can make choices that are essentially in line with trying to support the all the people around us. He said in another wonderful part of this essay, which I don't have here, he talks about how some fortunes are just vibrating with wonderful life because they've been. There are two issues. Let me make this clear. There are always two issues surrounding the making of money: how it is made and how it is spent. Has the money that you have been made honestly? Has it been made openly? Has it been made by giving full value for the work that you have done for another? Then that is good money. That is value, that is money that we can be proud of. Or conversely, has the money been made by tricking somebody, by trying to take advantage of them and to weaken them along the way so we can have more in our own pockets? Then that is money that has damaged the nation. The wealth of the nation is increased when we are honest and open with each other, and the wealth of the nation is decreased. The health of the nation is decreased when we hide things from one another. Anytime there's a secret, watch out. Everything should be open. Now, you can't always know these things, so so it always comes back to the individual. It comes back to the individual being an open and honest human being. And now we come to the paragraph you have on your screen in front of you. None of these things or these complex variables you can know. One thing only you can know, namely whether this dealing of yours is a just and faithful one, which is all you need concern yourself respecting it. Sure thus to have done your part in bringing about ultimately in the world a state of things which will not issue in pillage or in death. And thus every question concerning these things merges itself ultimately in the great question of justice, which, ground being cleared for it, I will enter on into the next paper, leaving only in this three final points for the reader's consideration, which I'm not going to deal with right now tonight. Okay, so that's the argument. Money can be made well and it helps the nation. Money can be made ill by tricking people and it harms the nation. It's always a moral issue. So think of things that you know or we know in our own lives, particularly West Coast people. We have we have Disney. Disney made unbelievable amounts of money by creating a product or a series of products that people just loved and willingly paid their money for, to go and see Bambi, to go and see Donald Duck, to go and see all the great characters that became part of the whole Disney phenomenon. And Ruskin would say that's money honestly made, as long as nobody was tricking or trying to put anybody else out of business in the doing of that. And we could be proud of it. Disney can be proud of that. We can honor Disney because Disney fulfilled his techne, as we defined it last week using Plato's concept, fulfilled his techne, the merchant's techne, which is to provide for the nation. What was provided for the nation? Great entertainment, lots of fun. So I remember seeing Bambi as a little boy and thinking to myself, oh my God, this is how the world works, because the mother dies at the end, as you'll remember. So it is a moral choice made by every individual about how he or she will comport himself or herself in the world of economic life. And this is the thing that was so offensive to so many of Ruskin's contemporaries. They read it and said, who are you to tell us how to do this? And at one point in the essay, I think he says it quite beautifully. He says, I know of no other instance in the history of the world where a whole nation or a series of nations have gotten together and decided to abrogate or deny the fundamental tenets of their own religion. Fundamentally, business is an issue, Ruskin would say, of practicing the golden rule, although we haven't talked about that yet tonight, but it is fundamentally that you do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Anytime you don't do that, you harm them. Anytime you do that, you help them along their particular way. Which brings us to the last paragraph that I will share with you from the essay tonight. And as Gabriel said earlier on, we are simply giving you paragraphs and ideas for discussion. These essays are so astonishingly rich. It's very, they take many readings. As I said, I've read them at least 20 times, and I always find there's more in them, like you do with great actors, different actors playing Hamlet. So here's the penultimate paragraph in the essay itself. Gabriel, do we have a paragraph 5 here?
No,
We don't. We don't. All right, let me share this.
we eliminated some of these paragraphs, Jim, when we talked about.
Yes, I know, but I have to share this.
Of course.
I have to share this as the last one, then we'll have a short discussion if we can. So Ruskin says at the very end of this essay, he says, finally, since the essence of wealth consists in power over men, will it not follow, this is one of the most beautiful lines that he ever wrote, will it not follow that the nobler and the more in number the persons are over whom it has the power, the greater the wealth? Perhaps it may even appear after some consideration that the persons themselves are the wealth, and that these pieces of gold with which we are in the habit of guiding them are in fact nothing more than a kind of Byzantine harness or trapping, very glittering and beautiful in barbaric sight, wherewith we bridle the creatures. But that if these same living creatures could be guided without the fretting and the jingling of these byzants in their mouths and ears, they might themselves be more valuable than their bridles. In fact, it may be discovered that the true veins of wealth are purple, but not in rock, rather in flesh. Perhaps even that the final outcome and consummation of all wealth is in the production of as many as possible bright-eyed, full-breath, happy-hearted human creatures as we can. Our modern wealth, I think, has rather a tendency in the other direction. Most political economists appearing to consider multitudes of human creatures not conducive to wealth, or at best conducive to it only by remaining in a dim-eyed and narrow-chested state of being. He says in the very last paragraph, in which I won't read all of it to you, I'll just read you the first sentence. Nevertheless, he says it is open to serious question, which I leave to the readers pondering, whether among national manufacturers, that of souls of good quality may not at least turn out to be a quite leadingly lucrative one. So that is what a snapshot of this wonderful second essay, The Veins of Wealth. The veins of wealth in their greatest essence are purple, flowing healthy blood in the system. It is all a system that is conducive to life or in some way hindering to life. We have a choice about how to do this, and however it turns out, it is our responsibility that it turned out well or ill. Gabriel, that's probably enough at this point. Let's, if we have a few minutes, let's have a small discussion of some of these manifest ideas.
Just a comment, Jim, it's so clear that the essay that you guided us through last week, which focused on the whole notion of we can't understand economics unless we understand human nature, and that we see economics as a function of being a full, as he says here, a full-hearted human being, so that it becomes really clear that his difference with Ricardo, for example, and Smith, is they're simply focused on the mechanics of wealth rather than the very purpose of wealth, which is what he calls political economy, which is made of humans and of human betterment and human happiness. So I think
right.
It's so clear that these essays are all connected in that fundamental vision.
It's as though Ruskin sees the political economist having left out the notion of the affections. And note that in all the examples that we've given, his idea of the importance of the affections, concern for the well-being of your fellow human beings, is paramount. It's as well, the political economists of his time essentially have devised a model which is that business is like algebra. It's a way to find, put the various kinds, put the various kinds of variables together to produce the maximum amount of money for your own pocket.
Can I
Other
add a
comments or
question there?
questions?
Yeah, so would he then term the contemporary political economists actually as mercantile economists and say that they've missed the point of political economy altogether?
You say that we've all missed the point of political economy altogether. Until we understand that living human beings and their well-being is the whole heart and soul of why we do business together, we will continue to do destruction to each other. I left out those wonderful passages where he talks about some treasures are heavy with human tears because of how they've been created. Other treasures are glittering in gold as the sun. So I said, let me again underestimate how you get your money. Do you get your money honestly? Do you get it? Are you well paid for what you do? Honestly paid for what you do? And then how you spend your money. You can choose how to spend your money. You can spend it on more jewels, or you can spend it on more cars. You can spend it on cigarettes. You can spend it on pornography. There's all sorts of things you can spend your money on. Ruskin would have us realize that every time that we spend our money, what we're fundamentally doing is calling into being a greater state of health or ilth. He has a wonderful term that he uses, ilth. Ilth is the opposite of wealth. Wealth is what allows human beings to thrive and be well. And ilth is what hurts them and brings them down and corrupts them in fundamental ways. We should always align ourselves with wealth and not ilth. The modern world as I know it, or as I read it or hear about it coming across the newswaves every day, still has essentially no notion that the business of business is not just to make money. The business of business is to make us well and strong and healthy. The nobler and the greater in number the human beings are that our economy creates, the better.
Other comments?
The subtitle of this set of talks is The Radical Social Thought of John Ruskin. This kind of social thought, which we're going through tonight and went through last time and will go through the next time as well, was deeply radical for his time. That's why he got so many negative reactions to what he was proposing for people to do. It's still a very radical idea. It's still a set of radical ideas. We think it's idealistic. No, Ruskin says it's not idealistic. It's exactly that way. If you decide to pay somebody, let's say 70% of what they need in order to live, you're essentially stealing 30% of the money they need to remain healthy as human beings in that particular paycheck. You do it 52 times a year, and you have weakened that person, that family. How is it possible in the richest country the world has ever known to have 25 million people making $25,000 a year or less in a family of four? It's almost defies credulity that we would allow such a state to evolve. We created it. Ruskin would say we are responsible for it. We must take moral responsibility for the alleviating of it and essentially ameliorating the conditions that made it possible and not have anything to do with them in the future ourselves.
I'd like to ask a question regarding Ruskin's trajectory, going from being an art critic and growing up studying art, seems to manifest the knowledge and the concept of the affections, and then turning that into political economy. Do you think as a model for essentially the liberal arts, right? Like having your mathematicians and economists studying the humanities, it seems that that's something that would have been so different about his trajectory than any of his peers writing about political economy. Do you think that is a primary aspect of what set him apart?
Yes, I do. Thanks, Trev. That is a fundamental. Ruskin's, we'll get to this in just a moment because we're going to talk about the next essay in a couple of minutes here. And I'll show you some pictures that have to do very fundamentally with the next essay. Art is another form of another way in which you can essentially elevate the consciousness and the well-being of a population. Great art, if you can get people to not only see great art, but to understand great art, and Ruskin saw himself as an art critic in this way, Let's go back to the first one. We'll stay there for a moment. I'll get to that in just a second. If you can get people to understand great art, it can be a liberating and elevating a thing in their lives. Like a great book, like when you let's say, well, the first time you really see Hamlet done properly, I keep using Hamlet, it's a good example. When you see Hamlet done properly, you say, oh my goodness, I can't believe somebody did something so wonderful as that, created that, and the whole storyline of all of that, and the wonderful language associated with that. It elevates us once as we come into it. I had a colleague at Hobart and William Smith many years ago. She's gone now. Her name was Katie Cook. She was a professor of English. And when I first started teaching, we had what was called a first year seminar. And one of the things I did in my first year seminar was to, I told the students, we're going to read the great novels of the world. So we read Don Quixote, and we read David Copperfield, and we read a number of other books, and I decided we would read the Brothers Karamazov. Well, as it turned out, Katie Cook was a specialist in Russian literature. And so I said, Katie, why don't you come out of an evening? We'll have dinner with the kids, and you can talk about Dostoevsky and the Brothers Karamazov. So at that point, we weren't through the book. We were probably about halfway through. And she said, as she came out, she said, I have been reading Dostoevsky now for 45 years. And about every 5 years, I make my way through the great novels again. And she said, every time I do, it's as though I'm reading them, if not for the first time, at least almost brand new again. There's so much wealth and depth in them. Ruskin's essays are like this. So great art is part of the whole process of humanizing us, making us into stronger and wiser and more insightful human beings. Gabriel, should we move on now?
We should move on, I think.
Okay, so the image you see in front of you right now, if you've not been there, I want you to think about putting this on your list now that we're getting close to the point where we can travel again. The image that you see in front of you right now is the Palazzo Publico in Siena in Italy, in the sort of central northern part of Italy, in the great town of Siena. Palazzo Publico can be translated in sort of a very cavalier way as the town hall. It was built in the early 1300s, and when Siena was becoming a major city in Italy, and it was built essentially on Roman principles. Gabriel, let's look at the next slide. Okay, this is the thing that I really want to tell you about, because the next essay, Qui Judicatis Terram, the third essay of Unto This Last, is essentially based on a metaphor that is derived from this room. And it has to do with the comments I just made about art in response to Trevor's question. The people who are in charge of Siena, the masters of Siena, decided that we're going to have a Palazzo Publico. And in the Palazzo Publico, we want to have something that will be of great use and value to the people who come to be in it and visit it and look at it. So they hired one of the two most famous fresco artists of the age. His name was Ambrosio Lorenzetti. The other one was his brother, second Lorenzetti, whose first name I've forgotten for the moment. And they said, we want you to come in, we want you to create a fresco about what a good city would be like. And so Lorenzetti took the commission. He worked for 2 years, and by 1839, he came in and he painted this room, which had been set aside for him. It's an immense room. It's called the Salle de Nove, the room of the nine, and it's where the 9 councillors of the 9 separate districts of Siena would come to discuss and adjudicate issues that affected the city. And here you're looking at Ambrosio Lorenzetti's 700-year-old fresco. It's a huge room, and it takes up essentially three walls of the Palazzo Publico in the room of the 9. And you're looking straight ahead. You're looking at what is the east wall, and I'll come back to it in a moment because I want to give you a little bit of a sense of what Lorenzetti was trying to communicate as we go along. And the east wall is on the right-hand side of your screen, and the north wall is on the left-hand side of your screen. Let's go to the north wall, which is the next slide. So the first time Ruskin saw saw these frescoes, and they're huge, was when he was a teenager. He went, remember last time I told you about how he had gotten as a gift Turner's Italy, the book of poems, and had told his parents that he had to go where Turner, and Gabriel, remind me who wrote the poems. Rogers, Samuel Rogers, Italy. And Rogers had commissioned Turner to write to draw some vignettes of images along the way for his Italian scenes. And Ruskin saw them and said, I have to go on this road. And so he did, but we talked about that last week. We don't need to go on with that today. So one of the places they stopped, Ruskin had never been there before, was the city of Siena, which we're talking about today. And he walked into the Salle di Nove, and this is the Lorenzetti fresco. It's called the Allegory of Good Government, and takes up the entire west wall of the Palazzo Publico. It is an astonishing thing. It is huge. You go in, there are no chairs in the room, so you have to go find somebody and say, please bring me a chair. I want to sit here for a while, and I want to talk about this. And as soon as Ruskin saw this, and he studied it for about an hour, standing up and walking around it, he knew he'd found one of the greatest pieces of art in the world. And so this is an allegory of good government. This is how good governments come about. So if you, let's see, can I use my arrow? Here's my arrow here. This is the concord. This is the bringing together. And she's giving a cord that goes to all the major merchants of the city, and they're all holding on to it, and they're all walking in slow procession here. Here is the Roman she-wolf and the two twins that she nurtured that became the founding part of Siena. Over here are soldiers bringing people that they've captured to judgment. We'll come back to that in a moment. And here in the center of the image, of the painting, of the fresco, is a figure that is known as the common good, the person who understands how the world works and oversees the construction of the world. To his right, to his, let's see, this is his left, and to his right are important figures. This is not technically a religious painting, but here you have, with the cross, you have an image of faith, and here you have an image of hope, and here you have an image of charity. And these are all duly painted, and throughout all the frescoes, we have written things that were included by Lorenzetti to tell you what the fresco is about. Ruskin knew that he was in the hands of a great master, and this is the thing that taught him that great art could be used as a tool to educate a public, get them to understand the most important principles of life. He thought to himself, Lorenzetti has read all the great works of Western literature, from Cicero to Homer to Dante to the Bible to Plato, all the great works of Western literature, and he's distilled the essential teaching of what we have to do to live together well into this painting, an allegory of good government. If people, the message of this painting is, of this particular part of the walls, is that if people decide to align themselves with the good and the honest and the true and the faithful, they will thrive. If they do not, they won't. So here is the common good here. Let's look at the next image, Gabriel. Could we do that? There we have, is a close-up of the common good. And here are the great figures standing, giving him inspiration. This is magnanimity. This is temperance. And this one is wisdom. And I'm not quite sure who this one is over here. Don't remember her for the moment, but it's all very, very beautiful. And here's a figure of face of Christ looking down on all of these people, giving them inspiration. So these are the principles by which you live. Here come the folks, the soldiers bringing in the people. So Gabriel, let's go back one if we could. Are you there? Okay, then that's, well, yeah, go back to this one. What I wanted to show you on that one is these figures here. This is another figure of wisdom. The figure is wisdom. And Gabriel, let's go forward two, please, if we can. 1, 2, okay, here we go. Here's that one that you just saw a moment ago. Here are all the city burghers carrying the cord that leading them forward. And this is a figure of wisdom. and she's dispensing justice, and justice is of two kinds. One is here, these people are being given a strong box, in which we imagine is money. The roots of honor are service. They have in some ways served the city in such a manner that they deserve all the applause and accolades of the city. Well, on this side is called distributive justice. And you notice that a bit surprisingly, there's an angel figure that is decapitating one of the men in the picture. And they have done some things that are very heinous against the common good, or the common good, and so they have to be punished. And so wisdom decrees the application of justice. Sometimes it is supportive justice, and sometimes it is punishing justice. That's the way the world works. All right, so this is on the west wall. And here, you can't see it here, but it's right here. Behind her, it's very hard to see because it's been so faded by the 700 years. You find the words written, diligite justitiam qui judicatis terram, which Ruskin translates it in the second essay, which we'll talk about in a moment. It means give diligent love to justice, you who govern the world. Not, Ruskin points out in the passage where he discusses this in his essay, not just love justice, diligent love to justice. Focus on justice. You're always trying to do the thing that is the most just in life. And here is, here you can see is Lorenzetti's signature at the very bottom of the image itself. All right, Gabriel, one more, please. Next one. So this is on the east wall, which I showed you a moment ago. The east wall is divided into two, which is the Sali di Novi, the allegory of good government. This is the good city thriving. In other words, if we follow the principles of justice, if we follow the principle, qui judicatis terram, you who govern the world, love justice. If we follow those principles, all will be well. So the city is thriving here. There's construction. If you look, scholars have spent their lives interpreting these frescoes. You see construction going on up here. All is well in the city proper. There's some young girls dancing for joy in the city streets. There's a wedding procession going on down here. The shops are open. People are selling wine and cheese and the various things that people need in order to live. All is going on well as long as we follow the principles of justice. So this is the thriving good city. Gabriel, the next one, please. So this one is not as clear. I'm sorry for that. I apologize a bit. In any event, this is the Sali di Novi. This is the fresco. This is the allegory of good government. The south wall, the countryside, the republic is thriving. Over here, you see people exiting the city gates and going out into the countryside. All is well. People are talking to one another, taking care of one another, etc. Down here are fields that are producing. The vineyards are producing all the grapes that people need for the wine for the year. The wheat and other things that are needed for trade in the city itself are all depicted down here. You can't see it very clearly, which is too bad. There are books available which show all of this very clearly. But this will just give you an idea, and I hope make you want to go to Siena, get a chair, and sit in the Sali di Novi for about 3 hours as you look at all of this. That's what Ruskin had to do. He got to the verger. Go back one, if you would, quickly, Gabriel. Ruskin got to the verger. Gabriel, are you there? Can we go back one? There we are. No, I want to go back to the countryside one. Next one. Nope. Okay, so we'll forget it for the moment. But in any event, no. Let's go back to the images of the Palazzo Publico. Back there. That's the one I want right there. Oh, we
really do need to move on, though.
Okay, I'm almost done with this. So that's a good city thriving when people follow the rules of justice. Let's go to the next one. The next one was the countryside thriving. And now we go to the next to the last one, which I want to show you. This is what happens when you don't follow the rules of justice, when you don't give diligent love to justice. Everything falls apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. And so this shows, instead of the common good, a devil has taken over. And all of these figures represent various of the the sins. There's greed and there's fear and there's exploitation in some place. Somebody's being executed here. Outside, somebody's being essentially attacked and throttled on the city streets. Up here, you can't see, but there are people being devoured by dogs. The city falls apart. So if we decide not to follow principles of justice, then we're in great, great disarray. Gabriel, one more, and then we'll move on to the next essay. So here again is that north wall fresco, which is still very remarkably intact after 700 years of the allegory of good government. It is truly an amazing thing to see and spend time with. As I said, you can spend much time with it. And it's a lesson. And when Ruskin saw this, he said, that's it, we can use it. We can use great art to elevate human beings. And so that's what he thought Turner was capable of doing. So I wanted to give you a sense of where the image or the metaphor for Qui Judicatis Terram came from. It came from his viewing of these walls. And so we come now to the third essay, Qui Judicatis Terram, you who govern the earth. And I will, he begins this essay. How are we doing for time, Gabe? Not very well. We're a little bit after 9 o'clock my time, which means 6 o'clock your time. People are getting hungry.
Yeah, it's 6:05.
Okay, so let me run a little bit of this by. Again, I'm just trying to give you a snapshot of ideas. We can't really go into these things as deeply as we need to get a real great grasp of them. So he begins this third essay because by now the brickbacks that have been written and sent to his publisher have now increased in number to not just a few, but dozens upon dozens, and the pressure on his publisher. Why are you publishing all this foolishness uttered by this guy who doesn't really understand what business is all about? Why are you doing all of this? I have increased to almost a flood of objections. Later on, Ruskin talks about his political economy essays having been reprobated in a violent manner. It's a perfectly apt way to think about the negative criticisms of his essays. Many of those criticisms still exist. We have copies of them, certainly not for tonight. And he begins this essay as a bit of a reaction to all of that. And he begins this essay by citing Solomon, the book of Solomon from the Bible, not because he wants to have any particular kind of religious message, but he wants to say that, and he uses Solomon as an example because Solomon was not a Christian, he was a Jew. And he wants to, what Ruskin is trying to teach in all of these essays is that these are not my principles, these are not Christian principles. They are Christian principles, but they are the fundamental principles of morality of all the great religions of the world. And so what everything depends upon is that people have this fundamental notion in themselves to be honest and decent and upright human beings. In Plato's Republic, early on in Plato's Republic, Socrates is asked to imagine, well, what would happen if you could get away with something really bad and no one would ever know it? And Socrates' answer was, well, if I could get away with something really bad and no one would ever know it, one person would know it. And the person that would know it is me. I'm the one, we always know when we're doing things that are against basically our own good or the common good or something that damages other human beings. We always know we have a conscience. And so Ruskin uses Solomon to remind us of the conscience and these being the principles of all the fundamental religions. People meet along the road, and I'm going to share this paragraph with you. They have met, meaning people have met more literally. They have stood in each other's way. That is to say, as long as the world lasts, the action and counteraction of wealth and poverty, the meeting face to face of rich and poor, is just as appointed and necessary a law of that world as the flow of stream to sea or the interchange of power among the electric clouds. God is their maker is a phrase from Solomon, but also this action may be either gentle or just, or convulsive and destructive. It may be by rage of devouring flood or by lapse of serviceable wave in the blackness of thunderstroke or continual force of vital fire, soft and shapeable into love syllables from far away. And which of these it shall be depends both upon both rich and poor knowing that God is their light, and that in the mystery of human life, there is no other light than this by which they can see each other's faces and live. So even though this is not a religious tract that Ruskin is writing, he wants us to see that these are eternal principles of the world in which we live. God is their maker. God made us all. And God is their maker. God is their light. And the principles of how to live together well were laid down long ago. Let's go to the next paragraph, Gabriel. So it is clear that the popular economist, in calling his science the science par, should be par excellence of getting rich, must attach some peculiar ideas of limitations to its character. This is another one of the major contributions of this second essay. I hope I do not represent him, the political economist, by assuming that he means his science to be the science of getting rich by legal and just means. But in this definition is the word just or legal finally to stand. For it is possible among certain nations or under certain rulers or by help of certain advocates that proceedings may be legal, which are by no means just. If therefore we leave at last only the word just in that place of our definition, the insertion of this solitary and small world will make a notable difference in the grammar of our science. For then it will follow that in order to grow rich scientifically, we must grow rich justly and therefore know what is just, so that our economy will no longer depend merely on prudence, but on jurisprudence, and that of divine, not human law, which prudence is indeed of no mean order, holding itself as it were high in the air of heaven and gazing forever on the sun of justice. Hence the souls which have excelled in it are represented by Dante as stars forming in heaven, forever the figure of the eye of an eagle, they having been in life the discerners of light from darkness, or to the whole human race as the light of the body, which is the eye, while those souls which form the wings of the bird, giving power and dominion to justice, healing in its wings, trace also in light the inscription in heaven, diligente justitiam qui judicatis terram, ye who judge the earth, give, not observe, merely love, but diligent love to justice. The love which seeks diligently, that is to say, choosingly, good word there, and by preference to all things else, which judging or doing judgment in the earth is, according to their capacity and position, required not of judges only, nor of rulers only, but of all men. A truth sorrowfully lost sight of even by those who are ready to apply to themselves passages in which Christian men are spoken of as called to be saints, i.e. helpful and healing functions, and to chosen to be kings, i.e. to knowing and directing functions. The true meaning of these titles having been lost through the pretenses of unhelpful and unable persons to saintly and kingly character, also through the once popular idea that both sanctity and royalty are to consist in wearing robes and high crowns, instead of in mercy and judgment, whereas all true sanctity is saving power, as all true royalty is ruling power, and injustice is part and parcel of the denial of such power, which makes men as the creeping things, as the fishes of the sea that have no ruler over them. Okay, so this is just a little bit of the text of Qui Judicatis Terram. Next one, Gabriel. All right, this is the central essay of this third essay, and having read this third essay so many times, I am bound to tell you that this is the most difficult cognitively and argumentatively. This is the most difficult of the four essays, because his argument is so closely reasoned and so carefully wrought. You have to go back to it and read it again and again and again until you get a good, strong sense. So right here, we're looking at one of the central arguments of all of unto this last. Money payment, as their stated meaning earlier, for work done, he means, consists radically in a promise to some person working for us that for the time and labor he spends in our service today, we will give or procure equivalent time and labor in his service at any future time when he may demand it. If we promise to give him less labor than he has given us, we underpay him. In other words, we extract sum of his penny a day. If we promise to give him more labor than he has given us, we overpay him. In practice, according to the laws of demand and supply, when two men are ready to do the work and only one man wants to have it done, the two men underbid each other for it. And the one who gets it to do is underpaid. But when two men want the work done and there's only one man ready to do it, the two men who want it done overbid each other and the workman is overpaid. And then he goes on to talk more about this, and we'll just let that go for the moment. This is a central idea. Next paragraph, Gabriel. When we ask service of a man, he may either give it us freely or demand payment for it. Respecting free gift of service, there is no question at present, that being a matter of affection, not of traffic. But if he demand payment for it and we wish to treat him with absolute equity, it is evident that this equity can only consist in giving time for time, strength for strength, and skill for skill. If a man works an hour for us and we only promise to work half an hour for him in return, we obtain an unjust advantage. If, on the contrary, we promise to work an hour and a half for him in return, he has an unjust advantage. This is the central argument. Justice consists in absolute exchange, or if there be any respect to the stations of the party, it will not be in favor of the employer. There is certainly no equitable reason in a man's being poor that if he give me a pound of bread today, I should return him less than a pound of bread tomorrow. Or any equitable reason in a man's being uneducated that if he uses a certain quantity of skill and knowledge in my service, I should use a less quantity of skill and knowledge in his. Next, Gabriel, if we can. And so I'll stop for a moment instead of read, and just to give you the idea. But the central idea is that he wants to get to is that if I work for you and give you an hour of my life and my strength and my energy and my mind, then tomorrow or later today when you pay me, and it should be my penny a day if you pay me, that should allow me to buy exactly the same amount of labor that I have given you for myself as I need it, so that I can then hire somebody to give me grapes that I can put on my table, and knit clothes for my children, and fix my roof when it leaks, and so on. That's what the money is for. And that is just, in other words, I get exactly what I should get. So I have thought many times as I've read these essays in recent years of the situation of our sports stars and our film stars who make immense amounts of money way beyond what they need in order to survive. They are paid those immense amount of monies because there are very few of them, those people who are that talented. And many people would like to see these guys play for the Los Angeles Dodgers or the Boston Red Sox or whatever teams we're talking about. And so they pay them millions upon millions and then millions more than that, so that these people become unbelievably rich. What would Ruskin say about that? He would say, well, they are massively overpaid. Where does the overpayment come from? It comes from the employers. In other words, the employers overpay them and impoverish themselves in the overpaying. And if they want to make it up, there's only one way they can make it up. They make it up from the people who come to watch these people play baseball or basketball or football or whatever is the sport that they are such stars in. And they charge them more for the hot dogs and more for the parking and more for the services that they get at the ballparks that they go to. And so in the end, we wind up paying for this extra amount of money for these folks. And so we overpay them what they don't. But let's say we go to the other side and we pay them less than they need to survive, then they become weaker and we all become weaker. And the game, let's say it's a baseball team, the team itself becomes weaker and does less well over the course of the season. Then people don't come see it anymore. So the fundamental idea is you pay exactly what service requires in order for that person to not only do the work for you today, but to have enough money in his or her pocket to do the work again tomorrow. And no more, that's overpayment, and no less, that's underpayment. And if you do that, that's just. And so we come to this paragraph. So by the just procedure, that means the whole price of the first piece of work goes into the hands of the man who does it. This is very important in terms of his argument. No surplus being left in the employer's hands. He cannot hire another man for another piece of labor. but by precisely so much as his power is diminished, the hired workman's power is increased. That is to say, by the additional half of the price he has received, which additional half he has the power of using to employ another man in his service. I will suppose for the moment the least favorable, though quite probable case, that though justly treated himself, he yet will act unjustly to his subordinate and hire at half price if he can. The final result will be that one man works for the employer at just price, one man for the workman at half price, and two, as in the first case, are still out of employ. These two, as I said before, are out of employ in both cases. The difference between the just and unjust procedure does not lie in the number of men hired, but in the price paid to them and the persons by whom it is paid. The essential difference, which I want the reader to see clearly, is that in the unjust case, two men work for one, the first hirer. In the just case, one man works for, let's go on to the next paragraph, and I don't think I need to share all of that with you. Number down, through various grades of service, the influence being carried forward by justice and arrested by injustice. This again is one of the central arguments of this essay. Overpayment is always wrong. Underpayment is always wrong. The universal and constant action of justice in this matter is therefore to diminish the power of wealth in the hands of one individual over masses of men and to distribute it through a chain of men. The actual power exerted by the wealth is the same in both cases, but by injustice it is put all into one man's hands, so that he directs at once and with equal force the labor of a circle of men about him. By the just procedure, he is permitted to just the nearest only, through whom, with diminished force, modified by new lines, the energy of the wealth passes on to others, and so until it exhausts itself. The immediate operation of justice is therefore to diminish the power of wealth, first in acquisition of luxury, no more jewels, no more Maseratis, and secondly, in the exercise of moral influence. The employer cannot concentrate so multitudinous labor in his own interest, nor can he subdue so multitudinous mind to his own will. But the second operation of justice, not less important, the insufficient payment of the group of men working for one places each under the maximum difficulty of rising above his position. The tendency of the system is to check advancement, but sufficient or just payment distributed through a descending chain and a descending series of offices or grades of labor gives each subordinated person fair and sufficient means of rising in the social scale if he chooses to use them, and thus not only diminishes the immediate power of wealth, but removes the worst disabilities of poverty. That's a very important element of this essay's argument, that poverty is only and almost always, except, and there are exceptions, a result of underpaying people. They don't have enough to live properly. So all the poor people who live in our cities, all the poor people who live in various places around the world simply are not getting enough to get by. That's no mystery, and that's not new for any of us to think through, but it is done simply because they are not being remunerated properly for the work that they do for us. We want to get rid of poverty, and the way to do that is to justly pay each person for the amount of work that they can do well for us. Gabriel, is there more? I can't remember whether there's more on this one here. Yeah, we're coming down to the end. And I will read this paragraph here, which you see in green in front of you, and then we'll end and have whatever discussion we can here at the end. I know it's been a long haul tonight. Ruskin writes near the end of this third essay, whether socialism has made any more progress among the Army and Navy, where payment is made on my principles, meaning that everybody is paid the same, or among the manufacturing operatives who are paid on my opponent's principles, meaning they pay whatever they can get away with. I leave it to those opponents to ascertain and declare. Whatever their conclusion may be, I think it necessary to answer for myself that only this, that if there be any one point insisted on throughout my works more frequently than another, that one point is the impossibility of equality. My continual aim has been to show the eternal superiority of some men to others. Turner is a greater painter than almost anybody else that's ever lived, sometimes even of one man to all others, and to show the advisability of appointing such persons to guide, to lead, or on occasion, even to compel and subdue their inferiors according to their own better knowledge and wiser will. This has been, parenthetically, this has been the function of kings and queens forever. Not that they've always lived up to it. My principles of political economy were all involved in a single phrase spoken 3 years ago at Manchester, where he gave a series of lectures called The Political Economy of Art. Soldiers of the plowshare as well as soldiers of the sword. And they were all summed in a single sentence in the last volume of Modern Painters. Government and cooperation, this is one of Ruskin's most famous lines. Government and cooperation are in all things the laws of life. Anarchy and competition are the laws of death. And that gives you some sense, but I gotta say, it gives you some sense in an enormously speedy fashion of the wonderful things that are in this third essay, Qui Judicatis Terram. So Gabriel, I'm going to stop there because I think we're getting close to what people can bear in terms of time. And if we have a few minutes left to talk a question or answer, that would be fine. Oh, I do want to share this a little bit. See, I can't give it up. And with respect to the mode with which these general principles affect the secure possession of property, and he means what we've just talked about a moment ago. So far am I from invalidating such security, said the whole gist of these papers, he means all the papers of unto this last, will be found ultimately to aim at an extension in its range. And where it has long been known, this is one of the things that made people so angry with him, and where it's long been known and declared that the poor have no right to the property of the rich, I wish it also to be known and declared that the rich have no right to the property of the poor. Okay, that's it for now, folks. Thanks for your patience. Go on. If we have time, Gabe, we can take some questions.
Yeah, I think we have about 5 or 10 minutes. So, I mean, it's it's an enormous feast, these essays. So there's a lot to absorb. Any comments?
Let me go back to that last little bit here. The poor have no right to the property of the rich. I wish it also to be known and declared that the rich have no right to the property of the poor. He means we have absolutely no moral right in all our dealings with other people to pay anybody less than what is a fair wage for the work that they do for us. And I did not stress this earlier, but I should have in some way. And again, this notion that if there's to be any advantage in any exchange, it is not to be left in the hands of the employer. The employer is not should never be in a position or willingly accept a position of exploiting anyone who works for them by paying them less than their penny a day. All the poverty that exists around us, friends, is our fault. It is something that we have willed into being by essentially wanting to fill our own coffers, bulge our own pockets more than we have any right to over the course of time. These people have been deeply injured by not having enough to live decently. And that is our responsibility and our moral responsibility in creating it, and our moral responsibility finally in finding some way to alleviate it.
So quick question, would the statement about, inequality or equality being an impossibility, is he saying that although that is true, it should remain out of economics or decision making, because that kind of stands in the face of a penny a day to everyone. There's no just reason not to pay everyone fairly or what they need to survive. But also he makes the claim that equality amongst people is potentially not real as well. I'm just hoping you can speak to that. Or
well, I'll give it a try. I don't know how well I'll do with it, but we are not equal in what we are capable of doing. Ruskin believed, and that came clear in the first essay, Ruskin believed that everybody has a talent. Everybody has some strengths that they can give to the others. We hire them we are employed in our various techniques, our various vocations, our various modes of work. And in those modes of work, we are morally obligated to pour all of our greatest energies to do that work properly as well as we can possibly be capable of doing it. Some of us are better than others. There are some baseball players that are manifestly better than others. There's no question about that. That is always the case. Should they be paid more? No, they should be paid enough to live decently, and basically we let it go at that. Should they ever be paid less? No, of course not. That principle should be clear. But fundamentally, we are not all equal. You see this all the time. Those of you who watch PBS, we mentioned this last time. There are great violinists and there are adequate violinists. There are great pianists. There are adequate pianists, not some who are nowhere near as good as the others. We should, of course, prefer the first, those who are greater than the others, and employ them. Do we pay them inordinate fees for the amount of work that they do for us? No, Ruskin said, we do not do that. We pay them enough so they too can live decently, and then let it go at that. This notion, this idea of greed, that I should get as much for myself as I possibly can. He is fundamentally against that. Lived his whole life against, essentially, without giving in to that principle. His father was a very rich man. And I told you that when his father died and left him something on the order in today's dollars of $37 million, he gave it, but before a decade had passed, he had given it all away. He always felt that his father's money, though his father was an honest merchant, his father's money, much of it was not necessarily and not needed, that he himself, meaning Ruskin himself, had lived on the largesse of his father, who had made his money honestly, but that he had too much more than he needed. And for the rest of his life, he was always giving paintings away. He was always giving. One of the things that I thought I would mention, since we have a moment here at the very end, is that the manuscript for the last two essays of Unto This Last, Qui Judicasterum and the one we'll discuss next week, Ad Valorem, are at the Huntington Museum in San Marino, very near Los Angeles, and they can be looked at by scholars, and I have looked at them in the past. And it is quite a thrill. But one of the things that is surprising about those manuscripts is that when you get to read them and you get to turn the pages one by one yourself, you find that some key passages from the essays are not present in the manuscripts. And that's quite disappointing. And I would go back and I would look through, did I miss that? Did I miss that? And I go back and I can't find it anywhere. And the real answer is that it's not there. Well, why is it not there? Because it was one of Ruskin's best passages. And he knew it was one of his best passages. And so what did he do? He gave it away. He gave it away to his friends. I had another experience a number of years ago where I was at a private home in England, and they had boxes of stuff of Ruskiniana. And I was going through one of the boxes, and I pulled out a manuscript page from Ruskin's autobiography, Praeterita. It was the first page of one of the chapters of Praeterita, and I was thrilled. And the reason was he had given it to the family who had bought the box, or he put it in the box because he thought somebody else should have it other than himself. Ruskin knew that he was incredibly talented with words, and so he did what he could to distribute that talent to various kinds of folks. He was always giving away money. He was never poor, but he was always giving away money whenever he could. My friend Dyke Benjamin tells a story of how he had been not he, but I think John Howard Whitehouse, who collected tons of Ruskiniana after Ruskin's death, had been at Brantwood. When he was walking down the lane one day, Brantwood is Ruskin's home in the Lake District. Ruskin was walking down the lane the same day, and he saw a man walking down who was a working man, and he had kind of tattered clothes on and very bad shoes. And Ruskin said, "Why are your shoes so bad?" And the fellow said, "Well, Mr. Ruskin, it's because I can't afford any new ones." So Ruskin reached into his pocket and gave him a £5 note and said, go buy a new set of shoes. He was always doing things like this. He was inordinately talented. We all have strengths. We should play to those strengths. We should use those strengths for others and to make others stronger. Since I know that was Trevor who asked the question, let me respond a little bit further. That's what parenting is all about. The whole job of a parent, or as my friend Jack Harris, who's also a teacher, likes to say, the whole job of a teacher is to give everything he knows away. And the whole job of a parent is essentially to give everything they know to their child, to the betterment of their child. You can overdo it and then you spoil the child. You can underdo it and then you harm the child. But in any event, the point is to make these young ones that are in your charge, whether they are students or children, as strong as humanly possible. That's the job. That's the techne of parent, or that's the techne of teacher. Some people are better at it than others. Some people love it more than others. So, Trev, I don't know whether that really answered your question, but certainly none of us are quite the same.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Jim, again for shepherding us through unto this last. Next week, we will be just a little less ambitious with a single essay, but the longest of them, and perhaps the most famous of the four ad valorem. However, please note that the date has been changed. It's Wednesday, not our usual Thursday. Wednesday, November 17th, same time, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So next week on Wednesday for the final essay of Unto This Last. As we talked about last time, again, if possible, please go over the study materials that are on the website beforehand. You'll find them on the website. We'll put them up this weekend, which will be the final essay plus the paragraphs that Jim is going to be using next week, so you have a chance to look at them ahead of time. And of course, feel free to browse the website for information about the Ruskin Art Club, membership information, and a host of Ruskin-related resources.
Let me say one final thing in conclusion, Gabriel, and that is I am deeply appreciative of the patience of our audience tonight, of people who are interested enough to stay on through all of this. I feel, having finished tonight, I feel that I have done only scratched the surface of these great essays, and I urge you very strongly to take the downloads that are provided on the Ruskin Art Club site and to print these out and read them yourselves, or better still, get Clive Wilmer's book, where all of these are printed in, all of Unto This Last is printed in Clive Wilmer's book. It's still in print 35 years after it first appeared, and that is a wonderful thing. It is the only, still, it is the only compendium of Ruskin's most important writings on political, economic, and social matters in print. 35 years after it was first published, that tells us something. And right. I want to underscore one more thing that Gabriel said, and that is that one of the great distinguishing features of Clive's edition are the footnotes. Ruskin was an astonishingly erudite man, as you all know from reading anything of his. There are references in his paragraphs. You say, oh my God, what's all that about? I don't understand that at all. And I skipped over most of these in these presentations. But Clive interprets them all. He interprets all the biblical references, all the classical literature references, all the art references, all the philosophy references, so that you have a much better sense of what Ruskin was trying to communicate. Most of Ruskin's argument, readership would have been a very highly educated, not as highly educated as himself, but very highly educated. So get Clive Wilmer's Unto This Last, read it. Read if you can, if you have the time. Please do read it 4 times. Ad valorem, the 4th essay of Unto This Last, before our session next week. We'll have a great time. Thanks again for all your patience.
Yeah, again, on the website, there's a PDF of the whole book of Unto This Last, the Clive Wilmer edition, with all the notes and commentaries. As I think Jim would agree, the introduction that Clive wrote, which is 45 pages in itself, is worth the price of admission. I'm holding up my copy of this Penguin edition that I use in my own study of Unto This Last.
And you'll note on the cover of that edition is the common good from the Palazzo Publico in Siena.
I don't know if anybody can see this, but there it is.
Thanks, Ted.
Anyway, happy Veterans Day all, and we'll see you next Wednesday.